April 28, 1943, somewhere near Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The desert wind carried the bitter taste of defeat. The last surviving elements of the 10th Panzer Division trudged through the sand under a burning African sun. Their boots heavy with dust, their rifles surrendered, their pride shattered. Overhead, American P-40 Warhawks circled lazily, their engines growling like vultures waiting for the dead dot. Private Dieter Kraus, just 22, stared at the line of captured Germans ahead of him. The white armbands of surrender gleamed starkly against their sunburnt skin. Around them, American soldiers, some white, some black, moved with quiet discipline, corralling the prisoners toward a convoy of trucks. Kraus blinked, uncertain he was seeing correctly. "Are those Negroes?" he muttered to his sergeant, a gaunt man named Becker. Becker frowned. Impossible. They must be servants. But they weren't servants. They were armed, confident, in uniform. One of them, a tall corporal with a sharp jaw and calm authority, directed the column with a steady hand. "Keep moving. Hands where I can see them. Nobody tries anything stupid." His accent was American, his tone commanding. The Germans hesitated. Becker stiffened. A black man giving orders, he whispered under his breath. The corporal's gaze fell on him. "You got something to say, Sergeant?" Becker said nothing. The moment hung in the heat like a mirage. The defeated masters of Europe being escorted by men their own government had called inferior. For the Germans, it was like the laws of the universe had been reversed. As the convoy rumbled toward an Allied field camp, Kraus watched through the slats of the truck bed. Everywhere he looked, American forces moved in perfect rhythm, tanks refueling, medics tending to the wounded, mechanics hammering armor plates back into place. But what truly unsettled him was how easily black and white soldiers worked side by side. They shared water, laughed together, called each other buddy. It was a scene no Nazi propaganda film had ever shown. That night, in the makeshift holding area, the captured Germans huddled together under the desert stars. The barbed wire glistened silver in the moonlight. Somewhere nearby, a phonograph played faint jazz, something slow and strange. Unlike the German marches they knew, Kraus leaned closer to the sound. He could hear voices, American voices laughing, singing, celebrating, and among them were unmistakably black voices. "How can this be?" he asked softly. They treat them as equals." Becker spat in the sand. "It's American chaos, degeneracy. It won't last." But his tone lacked conviction. The next morning, as dawn broke over the desert, trucks arrived bearing the insignia of the U.S. Army Transportation Corps. The prisoners were to be moved to a port bound for America itself. As Kraus climbed aboard, he saw the same black corporal from before, clipboard in hand, giving orders to both white and black drivers. Officers saluted him as they passed. Kraus felt his stomach twist. The world he'd been taught to believe in, the world of Aryan supremacy, of racial hierarchies, of destiny, was crumbling right before his eyes. The trucks started to roll. The wind howled across the dunes. And in that endless sea of sand, a young German prisoner realized that the war he'd been fighting wasn't just about territory or power. It was about truth. The truth that even the desert couldn't bury forever. May 12, 1943. Mid-Atlantic Ocean. The ocean stretched to infinity. A cold, grey wilderness that swallowed all sound except the low hum of engines and the groan of steel. Inside the dark belly of the Liberty ship SS Samuel Chase, hundreds of German prisoners huddled together, their olive-drab uniforms traded for coarse khaki issued by their captors. The air was thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and salt. Private Dieter Kraus lay awake on the lower bunk, staring at the riveted ceiling. The rhythmic sway of the ship did little to calm his thoughts. Around him, the other POWs whispered in the dark. "Do you think they'll take us to camps?" one asked. "Of course," another replied. "But I heard they treat prisoners well, even give them books, food, cigarettes, and the Negroes." A third voice muttered bitterly. "Do they serve us there?" That last question lingered. Nobody answered. The door clanged open. Light spilled into the hold. 2 American guards stepped in, rifles slung casually. One was white, broad-shouldered, chewing gum. The other was black, lean, sharp-eyed, carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone used to command. "All right, rise and shine," the white guard called. "Roll call, then chow time." The black sergeant glanced at his clipboard. "You men behave, and you'll get your rations on time. Any trouble, you'll spend the rest of the trip below deck without air." His voice was calm but carried weight. The Germans stood automatically, out of both respect and fear. Kraus noticed something subtle. The white guard deferred to the black sergeant. When the sergeant nodded, the white man moved. That simple gesture hit harder than a bullet. Later, on deck, the German prisoners were allowed brief moments of fresh air under strict supervision. The Atlantic wind cut cold across their faces. Kraus gripped the railing, his fingers numb. He looked across the open deck, where American sailors worked in teams, men of every color and background. A white sailor handed a wrench to a black petty officer. "Here you go, Chief." "Thanks, kid," the man replied, tightening a bolt near the winch. Then they laughed about something easy, natural, without the tension Kraus expected. He turned to Becker beside him. "Do you see this?" Becker scowled. "Americans are confused. They mix everything, blood, rank, race. It's unnatural." But Kraus wasn't sure anymore. It didn't look confused. It looked functional. That night, the POWs were fed hearty portions of stew and bread, far better than the moldy rations they'd eaten during the retreat from Tunisia. The black sergeant stood watch as the prisoners ate, ensuring order, not cruelty. When one young German accidentally spilled his bowl, the sergeant helped him refill it. Without a word, Kraus couldn't look away. This wasn't the picture painted by Goebbels' propaganda films. No chaos, no savagery, no hatred, just discipline and dignity. As the ship cut through the moonlit waves, Kraus stood near the rail again, staring at the endless sea. Somewhere far beyond the horizon was a country he had only seen in propaganda, a place his commanders said was corrupt, decadent, and weak. But now he was beginning to think they had lied. When the ship finally neared the American coast, fog cloaked the water like a veil. The distant sound of a bell buoy echoed through the mist. Then, faintly, the silhouette of land appeared. "America," someone whispered. And for the first time since his capture, Kraus felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger, but curiosity. If even the smallest details of his beliefs were wrong, what else might the truth look like? He didn't know yet, but the answer was waiting on the other side of the ocean. June 2, 1943, Hampton Roads, Virginia. The Liberty ship SS Samuel Chase crept into port beneath a rising sun, its steel hull glinting orange against the calm waters of the Chesapeake Bay. The long voyage across the Atlantic had been a blur of cold nights, distant thunder, and restless thoughts. But now the horizon was filled, not with enemy fire or grey waves, but cranes, smokestacks, and the busy hum of America at war. The German POWs crowded the deck rails, silent. The dockyard stretched before them like something out of another world. Massive cargo ships loading munitions, columns of trucks rolling across the piers, workers moving in precise rhythm. Among them were men and women of every color, white foremen shouting orders, black mechanics covered in grease, women in overalls hoisting crates of ammunition. For Dieter Kraus, it was like watching a lie unravel in real time. A black foreman, sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening under the sun, waved his clipboard toward a crane operator high above. "Hold it steady, Mac. You drop that, I'm sending you swimming." His tone was commanding, confident, and nobody questioned him. The white operator laughed, obeying the order without hesitation. The German soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Sergeant Becker muttered under his breath, "They're letting them command white men." His voice trembled, as if the very thought threatened the foundation of everything he'd been taught. The guards barked orders, snapping the prisoners from their disbelief. Single file, hands visible. "You'll be processed before heading inland." They were marched down the gangway, boots thudding on wooden planks. U.S. Army MPs stood waiting, some white, some black, rifles slung at ease, expressions calm but firm. As each German reached the checkpoint, his name and rank were recorded. Name: Jeffreiter, Dieter Kraus, Unit, 15th Panzer, Afrika Korps. The American clerk, a young black sergeant named Leon Turner, wrote it down with swift precision. "You'll be heading to Camp Swift, Texas. You'll be treated fair, as long as you follow camp rules." "Understood." Kraus nodded. Turner gave a brief, polite smile, professional, not hostile, and motioned him forward. It was a small gesture, but for Kraus, it burned deeper than any insult. Back in Germany, this man would not have been allowed to look him in the eye, let alone issue instructions. Yet here, on American soil, Turner was the one in charge, organized, respected, wearing the same uniform as any white officer did. wearing the same uniform as any white officer. Hours later, a line of trucks rolled through the Virginia countryside. The POWs sat in the back, guarded by American soldiers with rifles resting casually on their knees. The convoy rumbled past fields of wheat and small towns lined with white picket fences. Children waved from the roadside, some curious, others frightened, as the line of captured enemy soldiers passed through their peaceful world. Strange country, Becker muttered. No rubble, no bomb craters. Krauss nodded. They fight a world war, and their homes still look untouched. The trucks rolled on, through lush green fields and railroad crossings where freight trains thundered by, each loaded with tanks, trucks, or crates marked U.S. Army ordnance. America, it seemed, was an industrial giant, awake and roaring. When they stopped for the night at a military staging area near Richmond, the Germans were given water and food, beef stew, bread, and coffee. They ate under the watch of guards, who joked quietly among themselves. At one point, a young black corporal named Ellis approached a group of POWs to distribute more bread. Becker refused it, muttering in German, "I won't take food from a Negro." Ellis didn't react with anger. He simply placed the bread beside Becker, turned to leave, and said in calm English, "Suit yourself, soldier. Hunger doesn't care about pride." The other Germans stared at the ground in silence. Becker didn't touch his portion that night, but Krauss did. As darkness settled, the distant hum of trains and the chirping of crickets filled the night. Krauss lay awake again, the stars stretching endless above the barbed wire. He couldn't stop replaying what he'd seen. Black men and white men working together, saluting the same flag, calling each other brother. He had seen black officers giving orders to white soldiers without tension or mockery. It was not the world Hitler had described. It was something else, something stronger, maybe even freer. The next morning, as the trucks rolled southward toward Texas, Krauss watched the countryside roll by. Farms, rivers, towns filled with life untouched by bombs. He whispered to himself, maybe everything we believed was wrong. But Becker, sitting beside him, only grunted. "Don't get soft, Krauss. They treat us well because they want to break us." Krauss didn't argue. He simply looked out the window at the morning sun and thought, maybe they don't need to, because the truth was already doing the breaking. For them, June 8, 1943, Camp Swift, near Bastrop, Texas. The morning heat rolled in heavy, pressing down on the convoys as they approached the sprawling American POW camp. Dust clouds swirled from the tires, the scent of sunburned earth and diesel filling the air. Ahead lay rows upon rows of wooden barracks, tall guard towers manned by soldiers with binoculars, and fences strung with barbed wire that glittered in the relentless Texas sun. Camp Swift was vast, a self-contained city of war, holding not only German POWs, but training grounds for thousands of American troops. From a distance, the Germans could see trucks, supply depots, and drill fields echoing with shouted commands. But what struck them most was the strange order of it all. Clean, efficient, and alive. As the trucks slowed to a halt at the gates, the prisoners were greeted by the sound of a bugle. American guards stood waiting, some white, some black, lined up with discipline and quiet authority. The sight sent ripples through the German ranks. The hierarchy they'd been taught, the natural order of race and power, was nowhere to be seen. They were herded into the processing area, where military police checked names, issued identification tags, and assigned bunks. A large sign above the gate read, "Respect earns respect. Obey the rules, you'll be treated fairly." Inside, the camp was surprisingly organized. Each barracks had cots, showers, a mess hall, even a small recreation area. It wasn't comfort, but it was far from the brutal prison hell they'd imagined. The Geneva Convention was clearly in effect here. Still, the unease among the Germans grew when they noticed who was running much of the operation. A black lieutenant, crisp uniform, polished boots, silver bars glinting on his shoulders, stood near the central command post. Clipboard in hand, he was giving orders to white and black soldiers alike, his tone calm but commanding. "Keep that supply line clear," he said. "We'll move the new batch to Compound B and get the medics ready." Some of them looked half-starved. The German POWs watched in disbelief. Lieutenant James Carter, U.S. Army, military police, turned to address the new arrivals. "Welcome to Camp Swift," he said in a steady voice that carried across the yard. "You're prisoners of war under the protection of the United States Army. You will follow our rules, and in return, You'll be treated as soldiers, not slaves, not animals. Anyone breaks that trust, they answered to me. His gaze locked on the front row, Becker and Kraus among them. There was no hostility, only authority. For the Germans, that made it even more disorienting. Becker whispered under his breath, "A Negro officer, giving us orders." Kraus didn't respond. He just watched Carter walk away, surrounded by subordinates, white men who saluted him. Inside their barracks, the murmurs started. Some of the Germans laughed it off nervously, claiming it was American propaganda, a staged show to humiliate them. Others fell silent, staring at the floor, their thoughts twisting in quiet confusion. That night, as they ate dinner, beef, potatoes, and bread, Kraus couldn't shake the day's images. Black and white soldiers working side by side, saluting the same flag, eating at the same table. Even the mess hall was orderly, fair, and structured. There was no shouting, no discrimination. Across the table, one POW named Ernst spoke softly. "Do you think this is all real?" he asked. "That they actually live like this?" Becker scoffed. "It's theater. They're showing off for us." But Kraus wasn't so sure. "Maybe it's not theater," he said. "Maybe it's just America." Over the next few days, routine settled in. The POWs worked in the camp gardens, maintained roads, even built furniture for nearby military bases. The guards watched, rifles slung but rarely raised. One morning, while hauling lumber, Kraus tripped, dropping a plank on his foot. Before he could recover, a voice behind him said, "Careful there, soldier." It was Sergeant Ellis, the same black NCO from Virginia. He helped Kraus up, dusted him off, and handed back the plank. "Don't want you breaking something before the war's over," he said with a grin. Kraus hesitated, then replied, "Donker, thank you." Ellis smiled. "You're welcome, Kraus. You learn English fast." That brief exchange haunted Kraus more than he expected. It was normal, human, no hatred, no arrogance, just respect between soldiers. By the week's end, he noticed other small gestures that chipped away at the German illusion. A black medic, treating a wounded German POW with care. White American soldiers following orders from black superiors without question. Even the camp's chaplain, another African American officer, delivering sermons about forgiveness and dignity. At night, the barracks buzzed with quiet arguments. Some insisted it was a trick. Others whispered that maybe the Reich had lied. Becker grew angry, shouting, "You fools! They're manipulating you. They'll turn you against your homeland." But Kraus no longer felt so sure of what homeland even meant. As he lay awake beneath the dim light of the barracks, he thought of Berlin's rubble, Hitler's speeches, and the arrogance of those who said they were destined to rule the world. And now, lying in an American camp run by men who were supposed to be inferior, he wondered who was really winning this war. Because the longer he stayed in Camp Swift, the more it seemed that America's greatest weapon wasn't its tanks, or planes, or bombs. It was the way it made men question the lies they'd built their world upon. June 17, 1943, Camp Swift, Texas. The heat shimmered over the camp like a mirage. The Texas air buzzed with cicadas, and the faint sound of jazz from the American Recreation Hall drifted over the wire. Inside the compound, life for the German POWs had fallen into rhythm. Wake at dawn, roll call, breakfast, work detail, lights out. But beneath that order, something was changing. In the first weeks, the prisoners clung tightly to their German identity. They marched in step, held morning roll calls of their own, even whispered songs of the fatherland at night. Becker, still proud and unbroken, led those moments with a voice that tried to reach Berlin through the wind. But cracks were forming, small at first, then spreading like fractures in glass. The cracks began with conversations, quiet ones, dangerous ones. During work duty near the motor pool, Kraus found himself paired with an American mechanic, Corporal Davis, a tall, broad-shouldered black man from Chicago who spoke with a mix of humor and grit. "You ever seen an engine like this, Kraus?" Davis asked one afternoon, wiping grease from his hands. Kraus shook his head. "No, German trucks, smaller, lighter, not like this." Davis chuckled. "Yeah, but these babies don't stop easy. Neither do we." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Calm, confident, utterly sure of his place in the world. It was something Kraus had never seen from a black man in all his life. Not in Nazi Germany, not in any propaganda film, not in any speech from Goebbels. The world, outside the camp fence, was beginning to contradict everything they had been told. One afternoon, Becker saw something that shattered him. A convoy of American soldiers drove past the camp gates, among them, black and white men seated shoulder to shoulder in the same truck. They were laughing, passing around a canteen, a single unit bound by camaraderie, not color. Becker stared as they disappeared down the road, his knuckles white on the fence post. "They're pretending," he muttered. "It's all for show." But the thought rang hollow. That night, Kraus and a few others gathered at their bunk. They spoke in low tones, careful not to draw the guards' attention. "Do you think the officers in Berlin know about this?" Ernst asked. "About how Americans treat their Negroes?" Becker scoffed. "They're not. They're Negroes. The Americans just use them like tools." Kraus looked up. "Then why do they salute them?" Silence. The question hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the camp lights flickered against the night sky. Somewhere beyond the barracks, the sound of a harmonica played slow, soulful, almost mournful. Kraus listened, eyes closed. It wasn't German music. It wasn't martial or proud. It was human. Over the next days, he began to notice more. The American guards joked with each other freely, race never dictating rank or worth. The male clerks treated even the German POWs with routine civility. Some guards even brought books, English novels, old magazines to pass the time. One day, Sergeant Ellis approached Kraus's work team and dropped a folded newspaper onto the table. "Something for you boys to read," he said with a grin. It was a copy of the Pittsburgh Courier, an African-American newspaper. The headline read, "Negro troops earn praise in Italy, prove their valor on every front." Kraus didn't understand every word, but he caught enough to feel the weight of it. Black soldiers fighting and winning on the front lines. He looked up at Ellis, who was watching him with quiet curiosity. "Why do you show us this?" Kraus asked. Ellis shrugged. "Because truth's a funny thing. You can lock a man up, but you can't cage what he learns." That night, Becker exploded. "He's feeding you lies. You think these Americans care about them. They're just using the war to make themselves look good." But Kraus didn't argue. He didn't need to. The truth was in the way the guards treated them. Firm, yes, but not cruel. The truth was in the way Ellis carried himself. Respected, not feared. The truth was in the food, the order, the calm of the camp itself. Every day, the world inside Camp Swift looked less like the nightmare of racial chaos Goebbels had warned of, and more like a functioning, disciplined machine powered by equality. By early July, the whispers reached even the staunchest believers. "Maybe the Reich lied," Ernst said one night. Becker snapped. "You're a fool if you think that." But this time, no one nodded. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A Texas storm rolled in, dark and heavy. Rain lashed against the barracks roof, drowning out the sound of argument. Kraus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The storm outside felt like the one inside him, the collapse of certainty, the erosion of lies. And as lightning split the sky, he thought back to the words of Sergeant Ellis. "You can lock a man up, but you can't cage what he learns." For the first time, Kraus understood what freedom might truly mean, and it wasn't about borders or blood. It was about truth, and how it survived even behind barbed wire. July 9, 1943, Camp Swift, Texas. The dawn sun broke over the camp in streaks of amber and gray. The Texas dust still clung to the air after last night's storm, swirling through the barbed wire and catching the first glints of light. Morning roll call had ended, and the prisoners stood waiting for their work assignments. Private Kraus rubbed the sleep from his eyes, his thoughts still tangled with the storm from the night before. Becker hadn't spoken since their argument. The silence between them was heavier than any reprimand. As the guards divided the work crews, Sergeant Ellis's voice rang out, steady, commanding, unmistakably confident. "All right, let's move, men. Today we're unloading supply crates from the South Depot. Keep it clean, keep it moving." And there it was. Again, the sight that continued to undo years of German indoctrination. A black American sergeant giving orders to both white guards and German POWs, and everyone obeyed without hesitation. Beck's face twisted with disbelief as they fell into line. "This is madness," he hissed. "A Negro commanding Americans." Kraus didn't answer. He was too busy watching how naturally it happened. No hesitation, no discomfort, no second glances, just discipline. The convoy trucks pulled up, engines rumbling. Crates marked rations U.S. Army thudded onto the ground. The work was monotonous but strangely peaceful. The kind of labor that left time for thought. "Keep those hands clear." "Boys," Ellis called, his tone firm but not cruel. When one of the younger POWs dropped a crate on his foot and cursed in German, Ellis was the first to step in, helping him upright. "You all right? You gotta watch your step, partner." Partner. Kraus froze at the word. He'd never heard anyone, especially a soldier, use that word for a prisoner, let alone one who wore the same uniform color that Nazi propaganda had called inferior. That single word cracked something deep within him. Later that day, when the work was done, Kraus lingered near the mess tent. The aroma of cornbread and coffee filled the air, mingling with the metallic scent of dust and sweat. Ellis sat nearby, talking with another guard, a white sergeant named Thompson. Their laughter drifted over the camp, easy and natural. Curiosity won over fear. Kraus stepped closer. "Sergeant Ellis," he began cautiously, his accent thick. "May I ask something?" Ellis nodded, motioning for him to sit. "Go ahead, Kraus, long as it's not classified." Kraus smiled faintly. "In Germany, we were told your people were slaves, treated like animals. But here," he gestured toward the camp, "the guards, the sky, here you command. They salute you." How? Ellis leaned back, studying him for a long moment. "You ever been told a lie long enough, you start to believe it?" Kraus hesitated. "Yes, well," Ellis said quietly, "America ain't perfect, not by a long shot, but we fight every day to make it better. That's what makes it home." Kraus tried to absorb that. It was so far from anything he'd known or been allowed to believe. Ellis continued, his tone softening. "You see, my father was a janitor. My grandfather was born a slave. But here I am serving my country, wearing this uniform. The Nazis said we couldn't rise. Guess they were wrong." The words struck like thunder, simple, clear, undeniable. For Kraus, it wasn't just what Ellis said, it was the quiet conviction behind it. The certainty that dignity didn't come from race or rank, but from purpose. When Kraus returned to his barracks that night, Becker was waiting. "Where were you?" "Talking," Kraus said simply. "With that Negro again." Becker spat. "You shame yourself." Kraus turned to him, his face calm. "Do you know what shame truly is, Becker? It's realizing you've lived believing monsters were men, and men were monsters." Becker froze, words dying on his tongue. Around them, several other prisoners looked away, uncomfortable. The silence was thick, charged with something new, not fear, not defiance, but awakening. Days turned into weeks, and the camp transformed. The once proud symbols of the Reich, whispered songs, secret salutes faded into memory. Instead, conversations filled the air. Some POWs learned English from the guards, others began trading simple gestures of respect, nods, greetings, even shared cigarettes through the fence. A few were assigned to help build additional barracks alongside Black American engineers, working side by side without incident. By late August, the change was undeniable. The camp that had once been divided by fences and ideology now felt like something else, a strange, quiet classroom of humanity. One afternoon, Kraus stood outside as a group of African-American soldiers drilled in formation just beyond the fence. Their precision was flawless, their discipline absolute. The American flag fluttered behind them, bright even in black and white memory. He watched in silence, his thoughts heavy and clear. In Germany, he had been told these men were subhuman. In Texas, he saw them lead, command, and embody honor. And as the flag rippled in the hot wind, one truth became impossible to deny. The Reich had built its empire on lies, but inside this American camp, surrounded by barbed wire, guarded by those he once thought lesser, Kraus found something far greater than propaganda. He found the truth about freedom, and it looked nothing like he had imagined. August 28, 1943, Camp Swift, Texas. The late summer heat was unforgiving, pressing down on the camp like a blanket of iron. Dust clung to boots, uniforms, and even the sweat-slick faces of the prisoners who gathered in lines outside the mail tent. Mail Day, the one event that broke the monotony. A lifeline to a homeland that now felt like a memory fading in smoke. Kraus stood quietly, waiting for his name to be called. When it finally was, he stepped forward to receive a thin envelope. The paper yellowed and creased from its journey across the Atlantic. The handwriting was unmistakable. His sister, Anna. He sat by the barracks wall and unfolded it carefully, his fingers trembling. "Dear Wilhelm," it began. "The radio says our armies are pushing the Russians back. The newspapers call it victory, but the town is quieter now. The soldiers who left last year have not returned. They say the Americans bomb Hamburg, that the fire reaches the heavens. I hope you are safe." The words blurred before his eyes. He folded the letter slowly, the paper soft from his grip. In Germany, the propaganda still thundered like gospel, the Reich unstoppable, the Führer infallible. But here, behind American wire, Krauss had seen another kind of truth. Truth that breathed, laughed, worked, and saluted without hate. Laughed, worked, and saluted without hate. Across the yard, Sergeant Ellis supervised a repair team rebuilding the camp's fencing. His sleeves were rolled up, sweat streaking his dark skin, his eyes focused and determined. The German prisoners followed his commands with quiet efficiency, even Becker, whose pride had been battered down into wary compliance. When the work ended, Krauss approached Ellis again, letter still folded in his hand. "My sister writes that our leaders say we are winning," Krauss said. "But, here, I hear your radios, I see your newspapers. I don't think they tell her the truth." Ellis wiped his hands with a rag. "That's war, Krauss. Everybody's selling their own story. But time tells the truth for all of us." Krauss nodded slowly. "Do you think, after the war, they will tell us what really happened?" Ellis looked at him thoughtfully. "That depends. You're gonna ask the right questions when you get home." It was such a simple challenge, but it struck deep. That night, Krauss sat on his bunk, staring at the folded letter. Becker sat opposite him, polishing his boots, an act of habit, not necessity. "She wrote?" Becker asked, without looking up. "Yes," Krauss said quietly. "She says things are good. She says they're winning." Becker gave a bitter laugh. "Of course she does. They'll say that until the bombs are falling on Berlin." Krauss's gaze lifted. "And what will we say, Becker, when they ask what we saw here?" Becker didn't answer. The silence stretched until the lights flicked off, leaving only the soft hum of insects outside and the creak of old wood. Days later, word spread that a Red Cross delegation would visit the camp. The Americans cleaned and painted, posted notices, and ensured order. When the representatives arrived, Swiss men in neatly pressed suits, they walked the camp's perimeter, taking notes, asking questions. One of them paused before Ellis's team, watching the African-American sergeant lead both guards and posts in coordinated work. "Who commands this unit?" the man asked. "I do," Ellis replied firmly. The representative nodded, impressed. "You run a tight operation, Sergeant." Krauss saw it, the subtle pride in Ellis's face, not boastful but certain. And then he saw the look in Becker's eyes, confusion and unease, the last defenses of ideology crumbling. That night, when they gathered in the barracks, even Becker seemed subdued. "They let him command," he said quietly, "even with foreigners watching." Krauss folded his arms. "Because it's normal to them." Becker stared at him for a long moment. "In Germany, that could never happen." "I know," Krauss said softly. "That's why Germany will lose." The words hit like artillery. Becker turned away, his shoulders rigid. No one spoke. No one needed to. The war might have still raged overseas, but here, in the heart of Texas, its outcome was already being written in the minds of men who had once believed themselves superior. In the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Letters home changed tone. The words became less rigid, less devoted to the Reich. Some POWs wrote about the camp's conditions, about the Americans they met, about the black soldiers who led with dignity and respect. Of course, every letter was censored. The army read everything before it left US soil. But fragments slipped through, and back in Germany, families began to whisper. Was it true? Were the Americans not monsters? Were their Negroes actually soldiers, respected and disciplined? Could the Reich have lied, even about this? For the first time, the Nazi machine of propaganda found its lies corroded not by bombs, but by truth carried across oceans in the hands of their own captured sons. And for Krauss, the transformation was complete. The war he had entered as a believer had become a classroom. The enemy he had feared had become his teacher. And behind those fences of barbed wire, where he was supposed to lose his freedom, he found something the Reich could never have given him. Clarity. October 12, 1943. Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. Rain hammered the corrugated roofs of the POW barracks. The sky outside was a low ceiling of thunderclouds, heavy and bruised. Inside, men huddled around a single stove, its orange glow flickering across their faces. Wet uniforms steamed. The smell of damp wool and iron filled the air. It was another long day behind the wire. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. Corporal Heinrich Becker sat apart, arms folded, staring into the stove as if it were an oracle. Weeks had passed since Krauss's quiet declaration that Germany will lose. Becker hadn't argued since. His silence spoke more than his words ever could. Across the room, Krauss read aloud from an American newspaper he'd been permitted to keep. The headline was simple: Negro troops receive commendation for valor in Sicily. He read slowly, translating for the others. ... For bravery under fire. Sergeant Samuel R. Brooks led his men through heavy artillery to secure a hill outside Palermo. His leadership inspired both white and colored troops alike. Murmurs rippled through the group. Lies, Becker muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. Krauss looked up. You think so? Becker hesitated. They print these stories for morale. No colored man leads white soldiers into battle. From the corner, another POW, Private Ernst Toller, spoke quietly. But we've seen them lead. Becker here every day. Becker didn't respond. The door opened suddenly, letting in a gust of rain and mud. Sergeant Ellis stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. Work detail tomorrow, 0700, he said, voice clear and commanding. Bring your gloves. We'll be unloading supply crates for the quartermaster. Yes, Sergeant. Several men replied instinctively. Becker didn't move. He just watched Ellis, the figure silhouetted against the storm, his presence filling the room like a challenge to everything they'd ever believed. When Ellis left, Krauss broke the silence. You still think the Reich told you the truth, Becker? Becker's eyes stayed on the door. I don't know what to think anymore. The next morning, the rain had turned the yard into a sea of mud. The prisoners worked in pairs, heaving heavy wooden crates off the back of a military truck. The boxes were marked rations. U.S. Army, 1943. Ellis supervised from the ramp, clipboard in hand. He was soaked to the bone but unbothered. Careful with that one, he called out. That's coffee for the officers. Don't drop it unless you want to make some enemies. The men laughed, even the Germans. The ice that once separated them was slowly melting. Becker and Krauss worked together, their boots sinking deep into the muck as they carried one crate after another. Krauss's shoulders burned, but he welcomed the ache. It felt real, grounding. During a brief break, Ellis approached them. You boys did good today, he said. Fast and clean. Appreciate it. Krauss nodded. Donker, Sergeant. Sergeant. Becker hesitated, then gave a small nod to, yes, thank you. Ellis grinned. You're welcome. Now get yourselves dry before you freeze solid. As he walked away, Becker exhaled slowly. He thanked us. Krauss smirked. Yes, and he meant it. In our army, that never would have happened. That's why your army burned cities, Krauss replied quietly, and his builds them. That evening, after chow, the prisoners gathered for their weekly English lessons. The classes were optional, but almost everyone attended, not out of affection for the guards, but curiosity. The teacher was a soft-spoken corporal from Louisiana named Davis, assisted by Sergeant Ellis. Today, Davis said, chalk in hand, we're going to learn words about fairness and respect. He wrote the first word in big block letters, equality. Murmurs rippled through the Germans. The word was familiar but strange, not something their language or culture had ever truly embraced. Davis pointed at Ellis. Sergeant, what does equality mean to you? Ellis folded his arms, thinking, means no man's worth more than another. You work hard, you earn your respect. Simple as that. Davis smiled. Well said. He turned to the class. Now, who can give me the German word? Silence. No one spoke, because there wasn't one that meant the same thing. Not really. Krauss looked down at his paper, at the strange English letters. Equality. It felt heavy, like something sacred. Later that night, Becker sat awake long after lights out. Rain tapped softly against the tin roof. His journal, a battered notebook, lay open on his bunk. He wrote by the faint glow of a match. Today, the black sergeant spoke of equality. I did not laugh. I wanted to, but I could not. Perhaps this is why they fight so hard. They believe what we were told was weaknesses, in fact, strength. He paused, listening to the storm. We thought we were the master race, but maybe the masters are those who serve others without hatred. The match went out, in the dark. Becker closed his eyes, and for the first time since the war began, he felt the walls inside his mind begin to crumble. Outside, under the moonlight, Ellis walked the perimeter. He stopped by the wire, watching the barracks glow faintly from within. A guard approached, rifle slung across his shoulder. Quiet night, Sergeant. Yeah, Ellis said softly. Quiet, but something's changing in there. The guard frowned. What do you mean? Ellis smiled faintly. You can hear it in their voices now. They ain't looking down anymore. They're looking around. The guard nodded, not quite understanding. But Ellis did. He knew that wars weren't just won with bullets. They were won when truth broke through lies, and inside those barracks, one mind at a time, the Reich was losing a war it never saw coming. February 17, 1944, Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Snow covered the camp in a white silence that felt alien after months of dust, mud, and rain. Frost clung to the barbed wire, glistening like silver thread in the morning light. The camp, once filled with hostility and defiance, now hummed with quiet routine. The Germans had grown accustomed to their new world, a world where discipline still ruled, but cruelty did not. In Barrack 12, Corporal Heinrich Becker woke to the sound of a bugle from across the yard. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and glanced toward Kraus, who was already lacing his boots. Morning again, Kraus said. Feels like the same day, Becker replied, pulling on his jacket, but it wasn't the same. Something had changed in Becker's voice. The bitterness was gone, replaced by reflection. Outside, the American guards, both white and black, moved with quiet efficiency. They worked side by side, handing off rifles, checking rosters, laughing over shared jokes. The scene looked ordinary, but to Becker, it was still extraordinary. Just a year ago, this would have been unthinkable. The Reich had built its empire on the belief that race determined worth, and yet here, in the heart of the enemy's land, Becker saw a system where competence mattered more than color, and where a man like Sergeant Ellis commanded respect not through fear, but through integrity. That morning's detail was different. Instead of unloading crates or digging trenches, the German prisoners were assigned to assist in the construction of a new barracks wing. They worked under Ellis's supervision, hammering and sawing in the cold air. Make sure that beam's level, Ellis said, gesturing to Becker and Kraus. Becker crouched, adjusting the frame. There, he said, nodding. Good. Ellis checked with a carpenter's eye. Perfect. You got the touch, Becker. Becker smiled faintly. I was a builder before the war. Ellis grinned. Guess some things don't change, no matter what uniform you wear. The words hit Becker harder than expected. For years, his entire identity had been wrapped in a flag, a symbol, a cause, a foot. Now, for the first time he remembered who he was before the Reich, a man who built, not destroyed. By noon, the men gathered near a fire barrel for warmth. Kraus sipped from his canteen, while Becker stared into the flames. Around them, Ellis and a white lieutenant reviewed blueprints together. Kraus spoke softly. Do you ever think about after the war? Becker nodded slowly. Every day, but I don't know what's left for men like us. Maybe, Kraus said, we start again. But this time, with open eyes, Becker glanced toward Ellis, who was explaining a measurement to the lieutenant with calm authority. Do you think men like him will ever forgive us? Kraus shrugged. He already has. Becker, you just don't see it yet. At that moment, the lieutenant called out, Ellis, tell the men good work today. The commands pleased with the progress. Ellis turned toward the Germans. You heard the man. They're impressed. Keep this up, and we'll have a roof over our heads before March. There was laughter, genuine laughter from both sides of the wire. That evening, Ellis sat in his office writing the daily report. His pen scratched across the paper, steady and sure. He paused for a moment, thinking about the faces he'd seen today. Becker, Kraus, Holler, men who had once sneered at him, now nodding with quiet respect. He wrote an additional line at the bottom of the report. Not all victories are fought with guns. Some are fought with decency. He signed it and leaned back in his chair, the lamp casting soft light on his uniform. Outside, the snow fell gently, muting the world. Meanwhile, in the barracks, Becker lay on his bunk, notebook in hand. He wrote slowly, his handwriting neater now, more deliberate. We were taught that strength was domination. But here, I have seen a different kind of strength, one that forgives, that endures without hatred. The men we called inferior have shown us the meaning of honor. I wonder if Germany will ever understand this lesson. He stopped, staring at the page, then added one final line. If this war ends, and I live, I will never look at another man's skin and see anything but the same blood beneath it. He closed the notebook and exhaled, the sound merging with the soft creak of the wooden walls. Kraus, half asleep on the bunk above, murmured, What are you writing now, Becker? Truth, Becker said simply. Kraus smiled. About time. Later that night, Ellis patrolled the perimeter one last time. The moonlight caught the frost on the wire, making it shimmer like glass. He paused near the gate, watching the barracks in silence. The camp had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. Men who once bowed to hate, now stood taller in humility. Ellis whispered to himself, maybe this is what winning really means. The wind carried his words away across the snow. Inside, the Germans slept, not as conquerors, not as prisoners, but as men finally beginning to understand the cost of believing in lies. And in that quiet camp, beneath the American flag, the last walls of the Reich began to crumble, not in Berlin, but in the hearts of its sons. March 3, 1945, Camp Shanks, New York. A cold morning mist rolled over the camp, blurring the barbed wire and guard towers into ghostly outlines. The war in Europe was nearing its end. Whispers of Germany's collapse had already reached the prisoners, carried by guards and intercepted radio static. The once proud soldiers of the Wehrmacht, men who had marched across continents, now packed their meager belongings, preparing for repatriation. Corporal Heinrich Becker stood quietly by the fence, hands gripping the cold wire. Across the yard, Sergeant Ellis directed a truck convoy, his breath forming clouds in the air. The two men locked eyes for a moment. No salute, no orders, just a silent acknowledgement between soldiers who had lived on opposite sides of a dying world. Kraus joined Becker, carrying a small wooden box. They say we'll be shipped out by week's end, he said. Becker nodded, his eyes distant. Do you think we'll be welcomed home? Kraus gave a dry laugh. By rubble and ghosts, maybe. Becker said nothing. He thought of his mother, of the village he hadn't seen since 1939, and of the Reich that had promised glory but delivered only ashes. Later that afternoon, Ellis entered the barracks carrying a stack of papers. Becker, Kraus, step forward, he said. The Germans approached cautiously. Ellis handed Becker a small envelope. From Washington, you're cleared for return transport. You'll leave with the next group. Becker opened the envelope. Inside was a repatriation document, stamped and signed. Below it, a small note written in careful handwriting. To Corporal Heinrich Becker, I hope you build again when you return home. S. Ellis. Becker looked up, speechless. Thank you, Sergeant, he said, his voice barely audible. Ellis nodded. You're a good man, Becker. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The war's over, at least. It will be soon. Make sure it stays that way inside you. The words hit Becker like a shell, not with violence, but with clarity. For the first time since the war began, someone had spoken to him not as an enemy, but as a man. That night, the camp gathered around the mess hall for what the Americans called a farewell dinner. It was simple: soup, bread, and a few cans of fruit, but for men who had lived on rations and fear, it felt like a feast. Ellis stood at the front, his uniform crisp, his expression humble. I don't have speeches for you, he said. Only this: when you go home, remember what you saw here. Remember that we treated you as men because that's what you are. Not because of what flag you served, but because every man deserves his dignity. If you remember that, maybe none of this will have been for nothing. The room was silent. Then, quietly, Becker rose from his bench. Sergeant, he said, may I speak? Ellis nodded. Becker turned to face his fellow prisoners, men who had once believed they were the master race. We came here thinking we were superior, he began, his German accent thick but his words steady. We leave here knowing we were wrong. The people we called lesser showed us mercy. They showed us honor, and I think they showed us what it means to be truly strong. There was no applause, no fanfare, only quiet understanding. When the trucks rolled out at dawn, frost still blanketed the ground. Becker sat in the back, his hands resting on that small wooden box Kraus had made a gift to remember the camp by. Inside it was a single nail from the barracks they had built together under Ellis's watch. As the convoy passed through the camp gates, Becker looked back one last time. Sergeant Ellis stood at the edge of the road, arms crossed, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. Becker raised his hand in a silent salute. Ellis returned it. The truck rumbled on, carrying men who had once seen the world in black and white, now uncertain, but perhaps for the first time, seeing its shades of grey. Years later, in a rebuilt Germany, a young architect named Heinrich Becker would oversee the construction of a school in Hamburg. On the cornerstone, he engraved a simple inscription: built by hands once taught to destroy, now building for peace. And though few would ever know his story, those who did remembered the quiet German who had learned the true meaning of humanity not in battle, but but behind barbed wire, under the command of a black American sergeant named Samuel Ellis, because in the end, war had not defeated them, had not, and that truth echoed long after the snow of 1945 melted into the soil of a new world that the war may have ended on paper. But stories like these remind us that its greatest battles were fought in hearts and minds. The tale of Sergeant Ellis and Corporal Becker isn't just history, it's a mirror. So now we ask you, which forgotten truths of World War II should we uncover next? What hidden moments, what untold human stories, deserve to see the light again? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because together, we're not just remembering history, we're revealing it one story at a time. We're revealing it one story at a time.